Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's David Carter. I had just turned 42 when we arrived at Fish Lake National Forest, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The RV had been Sarah's idea. "We need this," she'd said, scrolling through rental websites while our marriage counselor's words still echoed in my head. Communication, quality time, rebuilding trust. After my affair 6 months earlier, I would have agreed to a trip to Mars if it meant saving what we had left. Emma, our 16-year-old, had rolled her eyes at the suggestion. An RV trip? What are we, retired? But even she seemed excited when we picked up the 30-foot Winnebago in Salt Lake City. Our 12-year-old son, Jake, was practically vibrating with enthusiasm, already planning which video games to bring. "No screens for 3 days," Sarah announced as we loaded our gear. "This is about reconnecting as a family." Jake's face fell. "But Dad said—" "I know what Dad said," Sarah cut him off, shooting me a look that could have melted steel. "But this isn't Dad's decision anymore." The drive to Fish Lake National Forest took us through increasingly remote terrain. Pine trees pressed closer to the winding mountain roads, their branches scraping against the RV's roof like fingernails on metal. The radio crackled with static as we climbed higher, finally giving up entirely somewhere past the Panguitch turnoff. "GPS says we're still on track," I announced, though the device had been acting strange for the last hour, occasionally showing us in the middle of a lake that didn't exist. The campground Sarah had reserved sat deep in the forest, far from the main tourist areas. Private and secluded, the website had promised. It delivered on that promise with unsettling accuracy. When we finally arrived at Whispering Pines Campground just after sunset, we were the only ones there. The place felt wrong from the moment we stepped out of the RV. Not abandoned, maintained, but empty in a way that made my skin crawl. The restroom facilities were clean, the fire pits recently used, but there wasn't another soul in sight. Even the camp host's trailer sat dark and silent. "Where is everyone?" Emma asked, voice smaller than usual. "It's Tuesday in October," Sarah said, though she sounded uncertain. "Maybe we're just early in the season." We set up in Site 14, backing the RV between 2 massive pine trees that blocked out what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. Jake ran around checking out the picnic table and fire ring while Emma stayed glued to her phone, trying to find a signal. "Nothing," she announced. "Not even emergency calls." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "No distractions." I started a fire while Sarah prepared dinner in the RV's compact kitchen. The flames caught easily, almost too easily, burning with an odd blue tinge that I attributed to the dry mountain air. Jake sat on a log beside me, poking at the fire with a stick. "Dad, do you hear that?" I paused, listening. Beyond the crackle of flames and the distant hum of the RV's generator, the forest was strangely quiet. No bird calls, no insect chatter, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. "Hear what, buddy?" "Like whispering in the trees." I strained my ears but caught nothing. "Just the wind, Jake. These pines make noise when the air moves through them." But there was no wind. We ate dinner around the fire, hot dogs and s'mores, the kind of simple camping food that should have felt nostalgic and comforting. Instead, every bite tasted like ash, and conversation died quickly. Even Jake, usually a chatterbox, seemed subdued. "I'm tired," Emma announced after picking at her food. "Can I go to bed?" It was barely 8 o'clock, but none of us protested. We doused the fire and retreated to the RV, where Sarah had converted the dinette into Jake's bed and pulled out the master bedroom's privacy curtain. "Good night, everyone," Sarah called from our bed. "Tomorrow we'll hike the lake trail." I lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, listening to the forest. Jake had been right. There was something like whispering out there, just at the edge of hearing. Voices that might have been wind. Words that dissolved the moment I tried to focus on them. Around midnight, the RV started rocking gently, as if something large was walking around it. I sat up, pressing my face to the bedroom window, but saw only darkness so complete it seemed solid. The rocking continued for several minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I was still awake when Jake started screaming. His cries cut through the thin RV walls like a knife, high and desperate. Sarah bolted upright beside me as I stumbled out of bed, banging my shin on the dresser in the dark. Jake was sitting up in his makeshift bed, eyes wide and unfocused, pointing at the front window. "There's someone out there. There's someone looking at me." I flicked on the lights, instantly blinding us all. Emma groaned from the bunk above Jake, rubbing her eyes. "What's happening?" "Jake had a nightmare," Sarah said, moving to comfort him. "It wasn't a nightmare," Jake insisted. "There was a lady at the window. She was smiling, but wrong. Like her mouth was too big." I peered through the front window, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the interior light. Nothing but darkness stared back. "There's nobody there, buddy. It was just a bad dream." But Jake shook his head violently. "She was there. She was pointing at me." It took another hour to calm him down enough to sleep, and even then he insisted on switching to the bunk above Emma, as far from the front window as possible. Sarah and I lay in bed afterward, listening to the whispers that weren't quite whispers, feeling the RV sway with movement that wasn't quite wind. "Maybe we should leave in the morning," Sarah whispered. I almost agreed. Almost. But I thought about the money we'd spent, the time we'd taken off work, the fragile progress we'd been making in counseling. Let's see how things look in daylight. Kids always imagine things in strange places. Sarah didn't reply, but I felt her tense beside me. Morning brought no relief. If anything, the forest seemed more oppressive in the pale dawn light. The trees pressed closer, their shadows deeper and more angular than they should have been. When I went outside to check our generator, I found muddy footprints circling the RV, small, bare feet that could have belonged to a child. But there were no children at Whispering Pines campground. "Look at this," Emma called from inside the RV. She was holding her phone, frowning at the screen. "I took some pictures yesterday when we arrived, but they're all wrong." She showed me the photos. In each one, our RV sat alone in the campsite, but there was something else. A pale shape barely visible between the trees in the background. It was human-sized, but wrong somehow, elongated and twisted. "Probably just a trick of the light," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. Sarah was quiet during breakfast, picking at her scrambled eggs and casting nervous glances toward the windows. Jake refused to go outside alone, insisting that one of us accompany him even to the bathroom. "I want to go home," he announced. "We just got here," I said. "Let's try the hiking trail. Fresh air will do us all good." The trail to Fish Lake started just past the camp host's empty trailer. According to the posted map, it was an easy 2-mile loop through old-growth pines to a small alpine lake, perfect for a family with young kids. We set out around 10, Sarah carrying a day pack with water and snacks. The trail was well maintained but showed no recent use. No footprints in the soft earth, no broken branches or disturbed undergrowth. We might have been the first people to walk it in months. The forest felt different on foot, more immediate and threatening. The trees seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel of shadows that our eyes never quite adjusted to. Emma walked close behind me, uncharacteristically quiet, while Jake held Sarah's hand tightly. "How much farther?" Jake asked after we'd been walking for 30 minutes. I checked my GPS, frowning. The device showed us moving in circles even though the trail had been straight as an arrow. According to the screen, we'd covered less than half a mile. "Should be just ahead," I lied. But the trail stretched on, winding through identical stands of pine trees that all looked the same. The whispers were clearer here, coming from just beyond the tree line on either side of the path. Sometimes I could almost make out words, fragments of conversation in voices that sounded familiar but wrong. "Did you hear that?" Emma stopped suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Hear what?" Someone called my name. A woman's voice. We all stood silent, listening. The forest was absolutely quiet except for our own breathing and the whispers that might have been wind. "Let's keep moving," Sarah said, but her voice was tight with fear. The lake, when we finally reached it, was nothing like the photos on the trail map. Instead of a clear alpine pool reflecting the sky, we found a black mirror of water that seemed to swallow light. The surface was perfectly still, without even the ripples that should have been caused by the breeze moving through the pines. "It stinks." Jake wrinkled his nose, and he was right. The lake reeked of decay, of things that had died and been left to rot in stagnant water. "Let's not stay long," Sarah said. But Emma was already walking toward the water's edge, drawn by something none of us could see. She knelt by the shore, peering into the black depths. "Em, get away from there," I called. She didn't respond, didn't even act like she'd heard me. "Emma!" Sarah's voice was sharp with panic. Our daughter turned to look at us, and for a moment her face was wrong. Her smile too wide, her eyes reflecting light like an animal's. Then she blinked, and she was Emma again, confused and frightened. "Why are you yelling at me? You didn't answer when we called." "You didn't call?" Emma looked genuinely puzzled. "I just got here." But she'd been kneeling by the lake for at least 2 minutes. We hurried back to the RV, taking what should have been the same trail but somehow felt different. The trees were arranged wrong. The shadows fell at impossible angles, and twice I could have sworn we passed the same lightning-struck pine that stood guard over a small clearing. The GPS was no help. It showed us as a blue dot floating in white space, disconnected from any roads or landmarks. According to the device, we were nowhere at all. "The trail markers," Sarah pointed out. "They're different." She was right. The wooden signs that had pointed toward Fish Lake on our way in now indicated directions to places that didn't exist. Whistling Meadow, Devil's Thumb, Children's Grove. "We made a wrong turn somewhere," I said, but even I didn't believe it. When we finally emerged from the forest, the RV sat in a different campsite than the one we'd left. Site 7 instead of 14, positioned between different trees, facing the opposite direction. "That's not where we parked," Emma said. I checked the site marker, then double-checked. Site 7. But our gear was all there. Lawn chairs around a cold fire ring, camp table set with this morning's dishes. "I'm calling this in," Sarah said, reaching for her phone. "Something's seriously wrong here." But her phone showed no signal, just like before. And when she tried the emergency function that was supposed to work anywhere, the screen simply went black. Jake had found something while we argued. A piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper, folded carefully and weighted down with a small stone. "Dad, what's this?" I took the paper, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The message was written in a child's careful handwriting. "Don't trust the one who comes back different." "Who wrote this?" Sarah demanded, looking around the empty campground. "There's nobody here," I said. "There's nobody here but us." But even as I said it, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt beside our RV. Tracks that hadn't been there that morning. That evening we tried to leave. I fired up the RV and pulled out of the campsite following the gravel road that had brought us in. But after 20 minutes of driving, we found ourselves back at Whispering Pines campground, pulling into Site 7 as if we'd never left. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. I tried again, this time taking careful note of every turn and landmark. Same result. The road led only back to where we'd started, no matter which direction we followed it. "We're trapped," Emma said, and the word hung in the air like a curse. Night fell early, the sun disappearing behind the trees with unnatural speed. We built a fire and huddled around it, nobody wanting to be alone in the RV. The whispers were louder now, coming from all directions, and sometimes they resolved into actual words. "Come play with us. We've been waiting. The water is warm." Jake pressed against my side, shivering despite the fire's heat. "They're getting closer." He was right. The voices were definitely closer, just beyond the reach of our firelight. And there were shapes moving between the trees, pale figures that disappeared when we looked directly at them. "We should go inside," Sarah said. But the RV felt like a trap, its thin walls and large windows offering no real protection from whatever was stalking us. We compromised by moving our chairs closer to the fire and keeping it burning high. Around midnight, Emma stood up. "I need to use the bathroom," she announced. "I'll come with you," Sarah offered. "I'm fine. It's just right there." Emma pointed toward the restroom building, barely visible in the darkness. "Take a flashlight," I insisted. Emma grabbed the heavy mag light from our supply box and walked into the night. We watched her beam of light bob across the campground, disappear behind the restroom building, then reappear a few minutes later heading back toward us. But something was wrong. Emma's gait was different. Too fluid, too graceful. She moved like she was floating just above the ground. And when she stepped back into the firelight, she was smiling that same too wide smile Jake had described from his nightmare. "All better," she said, but her voice had a strange echo as if someone else was speaking along with her. Sarah noticed it too. "Emma, are you feeling all right?" "I feel wonderful, Mom. Really wonderful." Emma's smile never wavered. "The lake is so pretty at night. You should come see it." "You didn't go to the lake," I said carefully. "You went to the bathroom." Emma's head tilted slightly, like a bird's. "Did I?" "I don't remember." Jake whimpered and moved closer to me. Sarah was staring at our daughter with growing horror, recognizing what I was trying not to see. This wasn't Emma. Not anymore. "Why don't you sit down, sweetheart?" Sarah's voice was carefully controlled. "I don't want to sit. I want to show you the lake. There are such beautiful things under the water." Emma's eyes reflected the firelight like mirrors. Children who want to play forever. I stood slowly, putting myself between this thing wearing Emma's face and the rest of my family. "What did you do with my daughter?" Emma's smile widened impossibly, splitting her face almost to her ears. "She wanted to come swimming. They all do, eventually." Then she lunged. I barely managed to grab the poker from the fire before Emma crashed into me, her fingernails, now sharp as claws, raking across my chest. We tumbled backward over the chairs, Emma snarling with an inhuman sound that raised every hair on my body. "Run!" I shouted to Sarah and Jake. "Get in the RV!" But Sarah was already moving, not away but toward us, wielding a camp shovel like a weapon. She brought it down hard on Emma's back, the metal ringing against what should have been bone and flesh but sounded more like striking stone. Emma turned on Sarah with those terrible mirror eyes, and I saw my wife's face go white with terror. "That's not Emma," she whispered. The thing that had been our daughter straightened slowly, its neck extending far beyond human limits. "Emma is safe," it said in a voice like rustling leaves. "She's in the water with the others. Would you like to join her?" Jake's scream cut through the night, high and pure and absolutely terrified. I looked toward the RV and saw more shapes emerging from the forest, pale children with too wide smiles and eyes like black wells, all moving with that same floating gait. "The rest room," I gasped, grabbing Sarah's hand. "It's the only building with walls." We ran, half carrying Jake between us, while behind us Emma Thing laughed with delight. The sound echoed through the forest, multiplying until it seemed like 100 children were laughing at our desperate flight. The restroom door was heavy wood, designed to withstand weather and time. I slammed it shut and threw the metal latch just as something crashed against the outside. Sarah was crying, clutching Jake to her chest, both of them shaking with terror. "Daddy," Jake sobbed. "Where's Emma? Where's our Emma?" I didn't have an answer. Through the single small window I could see pale shapes moving around the building, circling like predators. The Emma Thing was among them, still wearing our daughter's face like a mask. "Let us in," it called through the door. "We just want to play. Emma's having so much fun in the water." "What are they?" Sarah whispered. I thought of the local warnings we'd laughed off, the empty campground, the lake that swallowed light. "I don't know. Something that's been here for a long time." The creatures kept circling, tapping on the walls with fingernails that sounded like branches scraping against stone. Their whispers filled the air. "Come out and play. The water is warm. Emma is waiting." Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt broken in that place, unreliable. Jake had stopped crying and fallen into an exhausted sleep in Sarah's arms. I kept watch at the window, trying to count the pale shapes but losing track as they flowed between the trees like smoke. Just before dawn, they stopped circling. The whispers faded, the tapping ceased, and the forest fell silent. I waited another hour before carefully opening the door and peering out. The campground was empty. Our RV sat where we'd left it, the fire now cold ashes. There was no sign of the creatures, no evidence they'd ever existed except for the deep scratches gouged into the restroom's wooden door. "Are they gone?" Sarah asked. "I think so. For now." We crept back to the RV, expecting an ambush at any moment, but nothing stirred. The forest felt normal again. Birds calling, leaves rustling in a natural breeze, sunlight filtering through the canopy in ordinary patterns. But Emma was nowhere to be found. I searched every inch of the campground while Sarah tried frantically to get a cell signal. The lake trail was empty, the shore undisturbed except for a single set of footprints leading into the water and not coming back out. "We have to call the police," Sarah said. "We have to tell them." "Tell them what? That our daughter was replaced by something from the lake? That pale children tried to lure us into the water?" I ran my hands through my hair, feeling like I was losing my mind. "They'll think we're crazy. Then what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. How do you explain to the authorities that your 16-year-old daughter had been taken by something that shouldn't exist? How do you file a missing persons report when the missing person had tried to kill you? We broke camp in desperate silence, throwing gear into the RV without bothering to organize anything. All I wanted was to get away from Whispering Pines campground, to put distance between us and whatever lived in that black lake. The road out was clear and normal, leading us back to the main highway without any supernatural detours. But as we drove away, I caught a glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror. A pale figure standing at the tree line, waving goodbye with a smile too wide for any human face. It was wearing Emma's clothes. That was 6 months ago. We told the police that Emma had fallen into the lake while hiking alone, that the current had swept her away before we could reach her. They conducted a search, brought in divers and rescue teams, but found nothing in the clear alpine water they dragged. Because it wasn't the same lake anymore. Whatever had been there during our stay had hidden itself again, waiting for the next family to stumble into its trap. Sarah and I divorced 3 months after we got home. She couldn't look at me without seeing the moment I'd failed to protect our daughter. Jake refuses to talk about what happened, though he wakes up screaming most nights. Sometimes I drive back toward Fish Lake National Forest, but I can never find Whispering Pines campground. The GPS shows nothing but empty forest where it should be, and the locals I ask just shake their heads and suggest I try the developed campgrounds closer to town. But I know it's still there, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I get text messages from Emma's phone. "The water is beautiful here, Dad. Come visit soon. We miss you." I've changed my number 3 times, but the messages always find me. Last week, Jake came home from school with a permission slip for a camping trip to Utah. When I saw the destination, Fish Lake National Forest, I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't want to go," Jake said quietly. "But my teacher says I have to. She says Emma told her I'd love it there." His teacher is new this year. Young, pretty, with a smile that's just slightly too wide and eyes that reflect light like mirrors. When she laughs, it sounds like water lapping against a shore. I burned the permission slip and told Jake we were moving. Far away from Utah, far from any forests or lakes. But I don't think distance matters. Whatever took Emma has been here much longer than we have, and it's patient. It can wait decades for the right family to stumble into its web, and it never forgets. Sometimes I wonder if we ever really left Whispering Pines at all. If we're still trapped in Site 7, and everything since has been just another layer of the dream. Sarah files for divorce every few months, but never follows through. Jake starts new schools, but they're always in buildings that don't quite make sense, with teachers who smile too much. And I keep getting those messages from Emma's phone, promising that the water is warm and the children want to play. Maybe tonight I'll drive back to Fish Lake National Forest. Maybe I'll find Whispering Pines campground sitting exactly where it always was, with Emma waiting by the lake shore, ready to take me swimming with the others. Maybe that would be better than living with the knowledge that I failed her when she needed me most. The water is beautiful here after all, and we've been waiting so long to play. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Hocking Hills. I'm Dylan Foster, and I was 26 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. Harper and I had been together for 3 years when we decided to take that trip. She was always the adventurous one, rock climbing, kayaking, anything that got her heart racing. I was more of a homebody, content with Netflix and takeout, but I loved seeing her eyes light up when she talked about exploring some new trail she'd found online. When she suggested spending our anniversary weekend camping in Hocking Hills, I couldn't say no. "It'll be perfect, Dylan," she said, scrolling through pictures on her phone. "Look at these caves and the waterfalls. We can hike during the day and just disconnect. No phones, no work emails, just us." Harper was a graphic designer who worked from home, and I taught high school biology. We'd been talking about getting engaged, and I thought maybe this trip would be the perfect time. I'd even brought my grandmother's ring, tucked away in my backpack's innermost pocket. We left Cincinnati on a Friday morning in October, the leaves just starting to turn. Harper drove her Honda CR-V while I navigated with the GPS. Though she'd printed out backup maps, she was always prepared like that. The 2-hour drive south passed quickly, filled with her excited chatter about the trails she wanted to hit and the stars we'd see without city light pollution. "Promise me you won't check your email," she said as we turned off the highway. "Promise me you won't make us hike 20 miles on day 1, I countered. She laughed, that bright sound that always made my chest feel warm. Deal. Hocking Hills State Park was crowded when we arrived, families unloading coolers and setting up massive tents. Harper wrinkled her nose. "This isn't what I had in mind. Too suburban." I checked our reservation on my phone. "The campground's full anyway. Maybe we should—" "No." Her jaw set in that determined way I knew well. "I saw this spot on a forum. It's off the main trails, more secluded. Perfect for what we want." She pulled out a hand-drawn map she'd sketched from some hiking blog. The area was marked as the Hollow, a valley about 3 miles from the nearest official trail, accessible only by a narrow path that wound between limestone cliffs. "Harper, that doesn't look official. What if we get lost?" "We won't." She folded the map carefully. "I've got GPS coordinates, compass, everything. Besides, when have I ever led you astray?" I could think of several instances, but the excitement in her voice silenced my objections. We drove to the coordinates she'd found, parking at a small dirt pullout that wasn't marked on any official park map. The path into the woods was barely visible, marked only by a few cairns that looked like they'd been there for years. We shouldered our packs, hers organized with military precision, mine hastily stuffed that morning, and started walking. The trail was rougher than anything I was used to, winding through dense hardwood forest where the canopy blocked most of the afternoon sun. Harper moved ahead with confident steps while I stumbled over roots and stones. "Are you sure this is right?" I called after about a mile. The path had grown even fainter, and I hadn't seen any trail markers. "Trust me," she called back. "It's supposed to be hidden. That's the point." The woods felt old here, older than the groomed trails we'd hiked before. The trees were massive, ancient oaks and maples with trunks wider than I could wrap my arms around. Spanish moss hung in curtains despite being too far north for it, and I noticed Harper had to duck under several low branches that seemed to grow across the path deliberately. After 2 hours of hiking, we reached the hollow. It was beautiful, I'll give it that. A small valley maybe a quarter-mile across, surrounded by limestone cliffs that rose 30 feet on all sides. A narrow creek wound through the center, and the trees opened up enough to let in dappled sunlight. It felt like a secret place, hidden from the modern world. "See?" Harper dropped her pack near the creek. "Perfect." I had to admit she was right. The spot was secluded but not claustrophobic, with flat ground for our tent and fresh water nearby. I found myself relaxing as we set up camp, the stress of work and city life falling away. We spent the afternoon exploring. Harper found a small cave in the eastern cliff face, just big enough to crawl into. She emerged with dirt on her clothes and excitement in her eyes. "There are symbols carved in there," she said. "Really old ones. Native American, maybe?" I peered into the cave mouth but couldn't see much beyond the first few feet. "Probably just natural rock formations." "No, definitely carved. Come look." but the cave opening was barely wider than my shoulders, and the thought of crawling into that confined space made my skin crawl. "I'll take your word for it." She shrugged and wandered off to explore more of the cliffs while I set up our tent and organized our supplies. The afternoon was warm, unusually so for October, and I found myself sweating in my flannel shirt. As evening approached, Harper started a fire while I filtered water from the creek. The sun set early in the hollow, blocked by the surrounding cliffs, and darkness came quickly. Stars appeared overhead, more brilliant than I'd ever seen them. "Told you it would be perfect," Harper said, settling beside me on our camp chairs. "Yeah," I admitted. "You were right." We ate dinner by firelight. Just instant pasta and canned sauce, but it tasted better somehow in the open air. Harper told me about the symbols she'd found, describing intricate patterns carved into the cave walls. She'd taken photos with her phone, but when she tried to show me, the images were just black. "Must be too dark in there," she said, frowning at her screen. "I'll try again tomorrow with the flashlight." We talked until late, planning our wedding, not officially engaged yet, but speaking about it like it was inevitable. Harper wanted something small. Outdoors, maybe in a place like this. I found my hand drifting to my backpack where the ring waited, but something held me back. Not yet. Tomorrow maybe, after a perfect day of hiking. I woke sometime after midnight to Harper sitting up in the tent, perfectly still. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "Do you hear that?" I listened. Wind in the trees, the creek flowing, normal forest sounds. "Hear what?" "Singing." I strained my ears but heard nothing unusual. "I don't." "Shh." She held up a hand. "There, like children singing." A chill ran down my spine. We were miles from any roads or houses. "Harper, there's nobody else out here." She was quiet for a long moment, head tilted. Then she lay back down. "Must have been the wind. Sorry." But I noticed she stayed awake long after I'd fallen back asleep, and when I woke again near dawn, she was gone. I found her sitting by the dead fire, staring at the cave opening across the hollow. She didn't respond when I called her name, didn't seem to hear me until I touched her shoulder. "Jesus!" She spun around, eyes wide. "You scared me." "Sorry. How long have you been up?" I'm not sure." She looked confused, almost disoriented. "I think I was sleepwalking. I had this dream about the cave, about going deeper inside." Harper had never sleepwalked in all the time I'd known her. I felt that first tickle of unease, like finding a lump that might be cancer. "Maybe we should head back today." "Get a proper campsite?" "No." Her voice was sharp. "We just got here. I want to explore more, see what else is in that cave." She was different that morning. More focused, but in an unsettling way. She barely touched her breakfast, kept glancing toward the cave like it was calling to her. When I suggested we hike up to the rim of the hollow to get our bearings, she insisted on checking the cave first. "Just for a few minutes," she said. "I need better photos." This time I followed her, army crawling through the narrow entrance despite my discomfort. The cave opened up after about 10 feet into a circular chamber maybe 8 feet across. Harper's flashlight revealed what she'd been talking about. The walls were covered in symbols, carved deep into the limestone. They weren't Native American petroglyphs. These were something else entirely, arranged in spiraling patterns that seemed to move in the flickering light. At the center of the far wall was a larger symbol that hurt to look at directly, like it was designed to confuse the eye. "See?" Harper's voice echoed strangely in the small space. "Aren't they beautiful?" Beautiful wasn't the word I would have used. The symbols felt wrong somehow, like they were carved by something that didn't understand human proportion or perspective. "How old do you think they are?" "Old." She ran her fingers over one of the spirals. "Really old. I wonder what they mean." "Harper, don't touch them." She ignored me, tracing the patterns with obvious fascination. "They're warm." "What?" "The stone. It's warm to the touch." I reached out cautiously. The carved symbols were noticeably warmer than the surrounding limestone, though I couldn't think of any reason why that would be possible. "We should go." "Just a few more minutes." She was photographing the walls systematically now, moving around the chamber. "I want to document everything. But when she tried to review the photos, they were all corrupted. Strange dark shapes that definitely weren't what we'd seen. Her phone's battery was also draining rapidly despite being fully charged that morning. "Must be some kind of mineral deposit," I said, interfering with electronics. Harper didn't answer. She was staring at the central symbol again, that uncomfortable design that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at it. Her pupils were dilated, and she wasn't blinking. "Harper." No response. "Harper!" She jerked like I'd slapped her. "What? Sorry, I was just—" "It's fascinating, isn't it? Like it's trying to tell us something." I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the cave entrance. "We're leaving. Now." She didn't resist, but I felt her looking back over her shoulder as we crawled out into daylight. The rest of the day passed normally. We hiked up to the rim of the hollow, explored the surrounding area, even found an old deer trail that led to a beautiful waterfall. Harper seemed like herself again, laughing and taking photos with her regular camera instead of her phone. But as evening approached, I noticed her gaze drifting back toward the cave. "I keep thinking about those symbols," she said as we ate dinner. "They remind me of something, but I can't place what. Let's not worry about it. Tomorrow we can hike back to the car, maybe check out some of the official trails. I want to go back into the cave tonight." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, like she'd already decided. I stared at her across the fire, trying to read her expression in the dancing light. "Why would you want to do that?" "I think I missed something. There might be more chambers deeper in." "Harper, that cave barely fits us as it is. There's nowhere deeper to go. You don't know that." Her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "You barely looked around. You were too busy being scared." The accusation stung because it was partially true. I wasn't scared. I was being cautious. There's a difference. "Is there?" We went to bed without resolving the argument, lying in our separate sleeping bags with tension humming between us. I dozed fitfully, waking several times to check on Harper. Around midnight, I woke to find her gone again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out of the tent, scanning the hollow. Her silhouette was visible near the cave entrance, but she wasn't moving toward it. She was just standing there, perfectly still. "Harper?" She didn't answer. As I got closer, I could see she was asleep, standing upright with her eyes closed. Her face was peaceful, almost beatific, but there was something wrong with the picture. It took me a moment to realize what it was. She was standing exactly in the center of a circle of stones that definitely hadn't been there when we went to bed. The stones were about the size of footballs, arranged in a perfect ring around her. They looked old, weathered, but I was certain they hadn't been there before. I would have noticed them during our exploration of the hollow. "Harper!" I reached out to shake her shoulder. The moment I touched her, she gasped and opened her eyes. But for just an instant, they weren't brown. They were completely black, like pools of oil reflecting the moonlight. Then she blinked and they were normal again, confused and disoriented. "Dylan, what am I doing out here?" I looked down. The stones were gone. The ground around her feet showed no sign they'd ever been there. "You were sleepwalking again," I said carefully. "Do you remember anything?" She shook her head, looking genuinely puzzled. "I had the strangest dream. I was floating above the trees, looking down at the hollow. But it was different somehow. Bigger. And there were lights moving around down here. Like fireflies, but wrong." I guided her back to the tent, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake listening to Harper's breathing, wondering if I'd imagined the stones, the change in her eyes. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. The next morning, Harper insisted on going back into the cave. "I need to see those symbols again," she said over breakfast. "I think I understand them now." Understand them how? It's hard to explain, but in my dream, they weren't just random patterns. They were instructions, or maybe a map. A map to what? She couldn't answer that, or wouldn't. But there was something different about her this morning, something I couldn't put my finger on. She seemed more focused, more purposeful, but also somehow distant, like she was looking at me from very far away. "I think we should pack up and head home," I said. "We've been here 2 days. That's enough wilderness for me. One more night." Her voice carried that edge again. "Please, Dylan, this place is special. I can feel it." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Harper had never asked me for much, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Camping in an isolated spot was bound to make anyone feel a little strange. But I made her promise not to go near the cave without me. She promised. And then, that afternoon, while I was filtering water at the creek, she broke it. I heard her scream. The sound echoed off the cliffs, a high, piercing shriek that made my blood freeze. I dropped the water filter and ran toward the cave, calling her name. No answer. The scream had cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. The cave entrance looked different somehow, larger than I remembered. Or maybe it was just my fear making everything seem distorted. I grabbed my flashlight and crawled inside, moving as fast as the narrow space allowed. The chamber was empty. No Harper, no sign she'd been there. But the symbols on the walls were glowing. Not reflecting my flashlight beam, actually glowing with their own faint phosphorescence. The central symbol pulsed like a heartbeat, and I could swear I heard something like breathing coming from the stone itself. "Harper!" My voice cracked. "Where are you?" That's when I noticed the opening. Where the back wall of the chamber had been solid limestone, there was now a passage. Not large, but big enough to crawl through. The edges looked rough, newly broken, as if something had smashed through from the other side. I squeezed through the opening into a tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. The walls here were smooth, too smooth, like they'd been carved by something other than water. My flashlight beam seemed to be absorbed by the darkness ahead, showing only a few feet at a time. "Harper!" I called again. This time, I heard something. A faint echo that might have been my name, coming from somewhere far below. I crawled deeper into the tunnel, following the slope downward. The air grew colder and carried a strange smell, metallic and organic at the same time, like copper pennies mixed with rotting meat. The tunnel opened into a larger space, and my flashlight revealed something that made my mind reel. The chamber was huge, far larger than should have been possible given the size of the hollow above. The ceiling disappeared into darkness beyond my light's reach, and the walls stretched away into shadow. But it was what covered the walls that made me forget how to breathe. More symbols, thousands of them, carved into every surface in spiraling, interconnected patterns. They covered the floor, too, etched so deep they formed channels that ran with dark liquid. And they were all glowing, pulsing in slow waves like the chamber was breathing. At the center of the space was a raised platform made of the same dark stone as the symbols. On it lay Harper. She was naked, arranged in a specific position with her arms and legs spread to match the pattern carved beneath her. Her eyes were open but completely black, like two holes punched through her skull. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, but somehow I knew she was still alive. "Harper!" I stumbled toward the platform, but as I got closer, she spoke. "Dylan." Her voice was different, deeper, with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. "You shouldn't have come here. What happened to you? What is this place?" She turned her head to look at me, and her neck bent farther than it should have been able to, like an owl's. "This is where it waits. Where it's always waited." "What waits? Harper, you're scaring me." "I'm not Harper anymore." She smiled, and her teeth were wrong. Too many of them, arranged in rows like a shark's. Harper opened the door. Now I can finally leave this place. That's when I understood. The symbols weren't just decorations or instructions. They were a prison. And Harper had somehow set something free. The thing wearing Harper's face sat up on the platform, moving with joints that bent in directions human joints shouldn't bend. Around the edges of the chamber I could see movement in the shadows, shapes that might once have been people, changed into something else. "You can stay," the Harper thing said conversationally. "Take her place on the stone. Keep the door open while I explore your world." I ran. I scrambled back through the tunnel as fast as I could crawl, hearing things moving behind me in the dark. The Harper thing was laughing, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. I squeezed through the opening into the upper chamber and kept going, bursting out of the cave into daylight that felt like salvation. But the hollow was different now. The trees were wrong, leafless and black despite the autumn season. The creek ran backward, flowing uphill, and the sky, when I looked up, showed stars despite the fact that it was clearly daytime. I ran for our campsite, thinking I could grab my pack and get out of there. But the tent was gone. In its place was a circle of standing stones, ancient and weathered, arranged around a flat altar stone stained dark with something I didn't want to identify. This wasn't our campsite. This wasn't even the same hollow. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Harper walking out of the cave. She looked normal now. Human proportions, brown eyes, familiar smile, but she walked with a predator's grace like she was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. "Where are you going, Dylan?" she asked. "Don't you want to stay and explore? There's so much to see here." I backed away, looking for the path we'd taken into the hollow. But the cliffs rose seamlessly on all sides now, unbroken stone with no exit. "This isn't real," I said. "This is some kind of hallucination." "Is it?" She tilted her head at that wrong angle again. "How would you know the difference?" That's when I noticed my hands. They were translucent, like I was becoming a ghost. I could see through my fingers to the ground beneath. "The door works both ways," the Harper thing explained helpfully. "I get to leave, and you get to take my place. Fair trade, don't you think?" I was fading, becoming part of this wrong place. Soon, I would be another shadow moving at the edges of the great chamber, waiting for the next curious explorer to break the seals. But then I remembered the ring. I reached into my backpack with hands that were barely solid anymore and pulled out my grandmother's engagement ring. The gold caught what light there was and seemed to glow with its own warmth. "Harper," I said, holding it up, "I brought this for you. I was going to propose tonight." The creature stopped walking. For just a moment, something human flickered in its face. Surprise, longing, love. It touched its throat, and when it spoke again, the voice was Harper's. "Dylan, what happened to me? You opened something you shouldn't have, but you can fight it. You're stronger than it thinks you are." Harper, the real Harper, struggled to the surface. I could see her there, trapped behind her own eyes, fighting to regain control. "I can't," she whispered. "It's too strong. It's been waiting so long." "Look at me," I said, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "Look at the ring. Remember what we planned. The wedding you wanted, small and outdoors. Remember why you brought us here." The creature snarled and Harper's features twisted, but she kept fighting. "Dylan, get out of here, while you still can. Not without you." I slipped the ring onto her finger and the thing inside her screamed. The sound shattered the illusion around us. The wrong hollow dissolved like smoke, revealing the real place beneath. Our tent reappeared, the trees returned to their normal autumn colors, and the creek flowed downhill again. But Harper was still changing, still fighting a battle inside her own body. "The symbols," she gasped, "in the cave. Break them. Break the pattern." I understood. The symbols were the lock that kept the entity bound. Harper had accidentally opened them, but if I could disrupt the pattern, maybe I could close the door again. I grabbed our camp hatchet and ran for the cave, Harper's screams echoing behind me. Inside the chamber, the symbols were still glowing, still pulsing with that heartbeat rhythm. I swung the hatchet at the central design, the one that hurt to look at directly. The moment the blade bit into the stone, everything exploded. Light, sound, pressure, like being inside a detonating bomb. The cave shook, chunks of limestone falling from the ceiling. I swung again and again, destroying as much of the carved pattern as I could reach before the roof came down. When I crawled out of the collapsing cave, Harper was lying unconscious by our tent. Normal, human, breathing. The ring was still on her finger. I carried her out of the hollow that same day, following our GPS back to the car. She woke up during the drive home, disoriented and with no memory of the last 2 days. As far as she knew, we'd had a nice camping trip and I'd proposed by the creek. The doctors said she'd had some kind of seizure, possibly brought on by stress or an undiagnosed condition. They ran tests but found nothing wrong. Harper recovered completely, and we were married 6 months later. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I catch her staring out the bedroom window with eyes that reflect light like an animal's. Sometimes I hear her humming melodies that sound like the wind through limestone caves. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear that heartbeat rhythm pulsing through the walls of our house. I tell myself it's just my imagination. Trauma from those 2 days in the woods. The cave collapsed completely. I checked satellite images online. There's nothing left of the chamber or the symbols, just a pile of rubble. But last week, Harper suggested we go camping again. She had this spot picked out, she said. A hidden valley she'd found on a hiking forum. Untouched and perfect for a romantic getaway. I said no, of course. Made excuses about work, about being too busy. But she keeps asking, and each time her smile looks a little less human. Each time I'm a little more certain that something followed us home from Hocking Hills. Something that's been wearing my wife's face, waiting patiently for another chance to open a door. I think it's almost ready to try again. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's David Jones. I had just turned 42 when we arrived at Great Basin National Park. And it was the worst mistake of our lives. The warnings came from a grizzled old man at the last gas station before the park boundary, somewhere outside Baker, Nevada. Population 68, according to the faded sign. He'd watched us fill up our 30-foot Winnebago with an expression that made my skin crawl. "Y'all heading up to Wheeler Peak?" he'd asked, spitting tobacco juice into a rusty coffee can. "That's the plan," I'd replied, checking the gas pump. Sarah was inside buying snacks with our kids. Emma, 16 and perpetually annoyed by family vacations, and Jake, 12 and excited about everything. This trip was supposed to fix things. Sarah and I had been fighting more lately, mostly about money, mostly about her mother moving in with us after her stroke. The kids felt it. Emma had started staying out late with friends I didn't trust, and Jake had become clingy, asking if we were getting divorced. A week in Nevada's most remote national park seemed like exactly what we needed. Just us, the desert, and some perspective. Wheeler Peak Road's been difficult lately, the old man had said, his rheumy eyes studying our RV. Folks get turned around up there, lost. Equipment starts acting funny. Funny how? Radios die. GPS starts spinning. Couple weeks back, family from Colorado went up there in something like yours. He nodded at our RV. Found their rig 3 days later, engine still running, doors wide open. Family inside was... He paused, working his jaw. Different. Quiet-like. Wouldn't speak to nobody. Just loaded up and drove home. Sarah had emerged from the station then, arms full of chips and sodas, Jake bouncing beside her. "Dad, did you know this desert has some of the darkest skies in America? Emma, look, they have a pamphlet about stargazing." Emma had rolled her eyes but taken the pamphlet anyway. She'd been trying to seem interested for our sake, though I could tell she'd rather be anywhere else. "Just saying," the old man had continued, lowering his voice. "Maybe stick to the lower campgrounds. Plenty to see without going up Wheeler Peak Road." I thanked him and forgotten about it within an hour. I shouldn't have. The trouble started immediately. Wheeler Peak Road was supposed to be a well-maintained gravel route leading to some of the most spectacular views in Nevada. What we found was barely a road at all. A rutted, washboard nightmare that had our RV lurching and groaning with every turn. "Jesus, Dad, slow down," Emma had snapped after a particularly violent bump launched her phone across the cabin. "I'm going 15 miles an hour," I'd replied through gritted teeth, fighting the steering wheel. The GPS showed us as a blue dot crawling up a thin line toward the peak, but the satellite imagery looked nothing like the terrain outside our windows. According to the map, we should be passing through open meadows. Instead, we were threading between massive boulders and stunted pine trees that seemed to lean in toward the road. "Are we lost?" Jake had asked from the dinette, pressing his face to the window. "No, buddy. GPS says we're right on track." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. The road seemed to wind much more than it should, and we'd been climbing for over an hour without reaching any of the landmarks mentioned in our guidebook. The Stella Lake trailhead should have been visible by now. So should the lower campground. David. Sarah's voice carried a note of concern. She was studying her phone. I don't have any signal. I checked mine. No bars. Not unusual in remote areas, but unsettling nonetheless. It's fine, I'd said. We'll get signal at the campground. That's when the engine died. The Winnebago had simply stopped. No warning, no sputtering. One moment we were climbing steadily up the mountain road. The next we were coasting to a stop on a small turnout barely wide enough for our rig. I tried restarting. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. Then it wouldn't turn over at all. What's wrong? Sarah had asked, and I could hear the old tension creeping into her voice. The same tone she used when discussing money problems or her mother's medical bills. Probably just vapor lock, I'd said, though I didn't believe it. Thin air up here. Give it a few minutes to cool down. Through the windshield, the landscape looked alien. We were surrounded by strange rock formations that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. The road ahead curved around a massive boulder and disappeared, while behind us it seemed to vanish into shadow despite the afternoon sun. Emma had been taking photos out the side window. Dad, look at this. I joined her, and my stomach had dropped. The photos on her phone showed our RV sitting in what looked like a completely different location, surrounded by dead trees instead of the rocky landscape visible through the window. That's weird, Jake had said, peering over her shoulder. Try another one. The next photo showed the same thing. And the next. Our RV surrounded by a forest of skeletal burned trees that simply weren't there when we looked outside. Camera must be malfunctioning, I'd said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. That's when we heard the humming. It started low, almost inaudible, a vibration more felt than heard. Jake noticed it first, tilting his head like a dog hearing a high-pitched whistle. What's that sound? We'd all gone quiet, listening. The humming seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my teeth ache. It reminded me of power lines, but there weren't any power lines for 50 miles in any direction. Probably just wind through the rocks, Sarah had said, but she was gripping the edge of the dinette table hard enough that her knuckles were white. I tried the engine again. This time, it wouldn't even turn over. The dashboard lights flickered and died. Dad? Emma's voice was small. She was still by the window, but she'd stopped taking photos. There's something moving out there. I looked where she was pointing, scanning the rocky terrain. At first, I saw nothing. Then, in my peripheral vision, I caught a glimpse of something dark sliding between the boulders. When I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there. I don't see anything, honey. It was there. Something tall. It was watching us. The humming had grown louder, and now I could feel it in my chest. A bass note that seemed to resonate with my heartbeat. Jake had pressed his hands to his ears. Make it stop, he'd whimpered. That's when I'd made the decision that still haunts me. Instead of trying to flag down help or walking back down the road, I decided we should get out and look around. Maybe find a spot with cell reception. Maybe figure out exactly where we were. Everyone stays together, I'd said, checking that the RV was properly secured. We'll just walk to that rise over there, see if we can get our bearings. Sarah had grabbed the first aid kit and some water bottles. Emma had brought her phone, still trying to get signal. Jake had wanted to bring his backpack with snacks and games. We'd locked the RV and started walking. We never should have left it. The rise was farther than it looked. What seemed like a 5-minute walk stretched into 20, then 30 minutes. The rocky terrain was treacherous, full of hidden crevices and loose stones that turned under our feet. Jake had fallen twice, scraping his hands on the sharp volcanic rock. But the worst part was the silence. The humming had stopped the moment we'd stepped outside, leaving behind an oppressive quiet that felt unnatural. No wind, no insects, no bird calls. Even our footsteps seemed muffled as if the sound was being absorbed by the rocks themselves. This is creepy, Emma had muttered, staying close to my side. For once, she wasn't complaining about being away from her friends or her phone. She just wanted to get back to the RV. When we'd finally reached the rise, the view had made my stomach lurch. Spread out below us was a vast basin filled with what looked like ruins. strange stone structures arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. At the center sat a massive crater, perfectly circular, as if something had been carved out of the earth with surgical precision. "What is that place?" Sarah had whispered. I'd pulled out our map, trying to correlate what we were seeing with the topography. According to the map, we should be looking at Wheeler Peak Campground and the Visitor Center. Instead, we were staring at something that looked like an archaeological site from another planet. "It's not on the map," I'd said. "Nothing's been on the map since we left the gas station," Emma had pointed out, and she was right. The landscape around us bore no resemblance to anything in our guidebook or on our GPS. That's when Jake had wandered off. I'd only looked away for a moment, studying the map and trying to figure out where we were. When I looked up, Jake was gone. "Jake," Sarah had called. "Jake, where are you?" We'd spread out, calling his name. The rocky terrain was full of hiding spots, boulders the size of houses, narrow crevices, shadowy overhangs. But Jake was a smart kid. He wouldn't just wander off without telling us. "Jake!" I'd shouted, my voice echoing off the rocks. The echo sounded wrong, distorted, as if it was being played back through broken speakers. "David, look." Sarah was pointing toward the strange ruins in the basin below. A small figure was walking among the stone structures, too far away to make out details, but the right size to be a 12-year-old boy. We'd scrambled down the slope, sliding on loose scree, scraping ourselves on the rough rock. The structures grew larger as we approached, revealing themselves to be far older and more complex than they'd appeared from the ridge. They weren't built from the local volcanic stone. Instead, they seemed to be carved from some kind of black rock that reflected light in unnatural ways. The figure was definitely Jake. He was walking slowly between the structures, his hands at his sides, his head tilted as if he was listening to something. "Jake," Emma had called. "What are you doing?" He'd turned toward us, and my heart had nearly stopped. His face was blank, expressionless, his eyes unfocused. He looked like he was sleepwalking. "Jake, come here," Sarah had said, her voice carefully controlled. She'd used the same tone when he'd had his last sleepwalking episode 3 months ago. We'd found him standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at the refrigerator. But this was different. When Jake sleepwalked at home, he moved clumsily, bumping into furniture, mumbling to himself. Here, his movements were fluid, purposeful. He walked between the stone structures as if he knew exactly where he was going. "Jake, stop," I'd commanded, using my father voice, the voice that meant immediate obedience. He'd stopped, but he hadn't looked at us. Instead, he'd tilted his head toward one of the larger structures, a twisted spire of black stone that seemed to spiral up into the sky. "They're calling," he'd said in a flat, emotionless voice. "Who's calling, buddy? The ones who sleep." Sarah had grabbed my arm. "David, something's wrong with him." I'd approached slowly, hands raised, speaking in the same gentle tone we'd learned from his pediatrician. "Jake, I need you to come with us now. We need to get back to the RV. They're waking up," he'd continued, still staring at the spire. "They've been waiting so long." That's when I'd noticed the symbols. They were carved into the base of every structure, spiraling patterns that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The same kind of patterns that made my eyes water and my head ache. "Jake, look at me." I'd stepped directly into his line of sight. "Look at Dad." His eyes had slowly focused on mine, and for a moment I'd seen my son again. Confused, scared, a little embarrassed. "Dad? How did I get down here?" I'd scooped him into my arms, relief flooding through me. "You sleepwalked, buddy. It's okay. Let's go home." But as we'd climbed back up toward the ridge, I'd looked back once at the ruins. The spire seemed taller now, and the shadows around the structures had grown longer despite the fact that the sun hadn't moved. Something was definitely wrong with this place. The walk back to the RV should have taken 20 minutes. After an hour of hiking, we still hadn't found it. "We're going the wrong way," Sarah had said, scanning the rocky landscape. "The road should be right here." I'd been thinking the same thing. We'd left clear landmarks, a distinctive boulder that looked like a face, a dead tree twisted into an impossible shape. But now, everything looked different. The boulders had shifted. The tree was gone. Maybe we got turned around, I'd suggested, though I knew we hadn't. I had a good sense of direction, and I'd been careful to mark our path. Emma had been trying her phone again. Still no signal. And look at this. She'd shown me the screen. The GPS was spinning wildly, showing our location jumping between different states. Nevada, then Utah, then Colorado, then somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Technology doesn't work right up here, I'd said, trying to sound confident. Probably mineral deposits in the rocks. But I'd been thinking about the old man's warning. Equipment acting funny. Folks getting lost. We'd kept walking, following what seemed like the most logical path back to the road. The terrain gradually changed around us, becoming more forested, with pine trees and scrub brush replacing the stark rock formations. The air grew cooler and carried the scent of something organic and unpleasant, like compost left too long in the sun. I don't remember this part, Emma had said, wrinkling her nose. Neither did I. When we'd walked to the ridge, the landscape had been primarily rock and sparse vegetation. Now we were threading between tall pines that blocked out most of the sunlight, creating a twilight gloom even though it was mid-afternoon. Jake had been unusually quiet since his sleepwalking episode, staying close to Sarah and glancing frequently over his shoulder. When I'd asked if he was okay, he'd just nodded and mumbled something about hearing voices. What kind of voices? Sarah had asked. Whispering. Like when you're in the library and people are trying to be quiet, but you can still hear them. I'd stopped walking and listened carefully. At first, all I could hear was our breathing and the soft crunch of pine needles under our feet. Then, gradually, I'd begun to make out something else. A soft susurrus that could have been wind through the trees, except there was no wind. Do you hear that? I'd asked Sarah. She'd nodded, her face pale. It sounds like voices, Emma had finished. It sounds like people talking. The whispering seemed to come from all directions, too faint to make out individual words but clear enough to recognize as human speech. Multiple voices, overlapping, rising and falling in what might have been conversation, or might have been something else entirely. Let's keep moving, I'd said, fighting down a growing sense of panic. We need to find the road before dark. But as we'd walked deeper into the pine forest, the whispering had grown louder and more distinct. I'd begun to make out individual words, fragments of sentences that made no sense. Said they would come in the dark spaces. Bones, remember. Wake them up. Emma had grabbed my arm. Dad, I want to go home. Me too, honey. We just need to find the RV. But I was beginning to suspect we weren't going to find it. Not today. Maybe not ever. We'd found the road just as the sun was setting, but it wasn't our road. This was a narrow dirt track that cut through the pine forest, unmarked and obviously unused for years. Weeds grew up through the center, and fallen trees blocked sections of it. This isn't right, Sarah had said, studying the GPS on her phone. According to the spinning display, we were simultaneously in 3 different time zones. But it was the only road we'd seen since leaving the ruins, and roads had to lead somewhere. We'd started walking along it, hoping it would connect to Wheeler Peak Road or at least take us to some kind of civilization. The forest around us had grown darker and more oppressive. The pines were enormous, their trunks easily 8 feet across, their branches forming a canopy so dense that almost no light penetrated to the forest floor. The whispering had continued, sometimes seeming to come from the trees themselves, sometimes from the shadows between them. Jake had been the first to see the lights. Look, he'd whispered, pointing ahead through the trees. At first, I'd thought it was another hiker with a flashlight. The light bobbed and weaved between the pine trunks, approaching the road from our left. But as it got closer, I'd realized it was too bright to be a flashlight. A brilliant white glow that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. What is that? Emma had asked. I'd been about to answer when 2 more lights had appeared, 1 on each side of the first. Then 3 more. Within minutes, dozens of lights were moving through the forest, all converging on our location. Run, I'd whispered. We'd run down the dirt road, crashing through the weeds, jumping over fallen logs. Behind us, the lights had multiplied, until it looked like the entire forest was filled with bobbing, pulsing illumination. They moved in patterns that suggested intelligence, coordinated, purposeful, as if they were hurting us. The road had curved sharply to the right, and suddenly we'd found ourselves in a clearing. At the center sat a structure that made my brain hurt to look at. A building that seemed to have too many angles, too many corners, as if it had been designed by someone who didn't understand three-dimensional space. And parked in front of it was our RV. How did it get here? Sarah had gasped, bent over with her hands on her knees. The Winnebago sat exactly as we'd left it, but wrong, somehow. The angle was different. The position on what should have been Wheeler Peak Road was impossible. We were in a clearing surrounded by forest, nowhere near the rocky mountainside where we'd broken down. Maybe someone moved it, I'd suggested, though I knew that was impossible. Our RV weighed 15,000 pounds. It couldn't be towed without specialized equipment. The lights in the forest had stopped at the edge of the clearing, forming a rough circle around us. They pulsed in unison now, like heartbeats, and the whispering had become so loud it was almost conversational. "I don't like this place," Jake had said, pressing close to Sarah. "The voices are angry." I'd approached the RV cautiously, checking for signs of damage or tampering. Everything looked normal except for one detail that made my blood run cold. The odometer had advanced by 340 miles since we'd left it. "David," Sarah had called from the other side of the RV. "Look at this." She was standing near the rear window, pointing at something scratched into the aluminum siding. Fresh scratches, bright against the weathered surface, forming symbols that looked disturbingly familiar. The same spiraling patterns we'd seen carved into the ruins. "We need to leave," I'd said. "Now." The engine had started immediately, as if it had never been broken. All the dashboard lights worked. Even the radio crackled to life, though it only picked up static punctuated by what sounded like voices speaking in reverse. I'd backed the RV around and headed for the dirt road, desperate to get away from the clearing and the impossible building and the lights that watched us from the forest. In the rearview mirror, I'd seen the structure beginning to change shape, its impossible angles folding in on themselves. "Don't look back," I told everyone. "Just look ahead." The dirt road had seemed longer on the way out, stretching endlessly through the dark forest. The GPS continued to malfunction, showing us driving through empty ocean, then through downtown Las Vegas, then through locations that didn't exist on any map. It had taken 3 hours to reach pavement. We'd driven through the night, not stopping until we reached Ely, Nevada, the first town with functioning cell towers and familiar chain restaurants. I'd filled up the gas tank while Sarah called her mother, just to hear a normal human voice. The kids had slept in the restaurant booth while we tried to figure out what had happened to us. "Maybe we got altitude sickness," Sarah had suggested. "Hallucinations are a symptom. All 4 of us? At the same time? Carbon monoxide poisoning? There could have been a leak in the RV." I'd wanted to believe her explanations. They were rational, scientific, based on known phenomena. But they didn't explain the symbols scratched into our RV's siding. They didn't explain the 340 miles that had somehow appeared on our odometer. And they definitely didn't explain what happened to Jake over the next few days. The changes had started small. He'd begun speaking more quietly, often mumbling to himself in what sounded like a different language. He'd stopped eating his favorite foods, claiming they tasted wrong. He'd developed an aversion to bright lights, preferring to sit in dark corners of our hotel room. But it was his sleepwalking that convinced me something was seriously wrong. Every night I'd wake to find him standing by the window, staring out at the parking lot with that same blank expression he'd had at the ruins. When I'd ask what he was doing, he'd say he was listening for the call. "What call, buddy?" "The ones who sleep. They're still calling. They want me to come back." On our 3rd night in Ely, I'd woken to find Jake's bed empty. I'd searched the hotel, the parking lot, even the surrounding streets. The police had been about to issue an Amber Alert when Emma had found him in the RV, sitting in the driver's seat with his hands on the steering wheel. "I was driving," he'd said when I'd carried him back to the hotel room. "I was driving them home." Driving who home? The ones who sleep. They need to go back to the place under the mountain. I'd made the decision that night to take him to a hospital in Salt Lake City, over Sarah's objections. Something was wrong with our son. something that went beyond sleepwalking or trauma from getting lost in the wilderness. The doctors had run every test they could think of: brain scans, blood work, psychological evaluations. Everything came back normal except for one detail that none of them could explain. Jake's pupils were permanently dilated, as if he'd been exposed to some kind of neurological toxin. "Has he been exposed to any unusual chemicals?" the neurologist had asked. "Industrial solvents? Agricultural pesticides?" "We were camping," Sarah had said, "in Great Basin National Park." The doctor had made a note. Sometimes people encounter abandoned mining operations in that area. Residual chemicals can cause neurological symptoms. But I knew it wasn't chemicals. It was something else, something we'd found in those ruins, or that had found us. Jake had seemed to improve during our week in Salt Lake City. The sleepwalking had stopped. He'd started eating normally again. His pupils had gradually returned to normal size. By the time we'd driven home to Colorado, he'd seemed almost back to his old self. The problems had started again 3 months later. I'd been working late in my home office when I'd heard the front door open. Since everyone was supposed to be asleep, I'd gone to investigate. Jake was walking across the front yard in his pajamas, moving with that same fluid, purposeful gait I remembered from the ruins. "Jake, stop." He'd paused at the edge of our driveway, turning to look at me with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "They're ready," he'd said in a voice that didn't sound quite like his own. "The ones who sleep are waking up. They need me to guide them." I'd brought him inside and locked all the doors, but the next morning I'd found symbols scratched into the paint on our garage door. The same spiraling patterns from the ruins, from our RV. Jake claimed not to remember making them. Over the following weeks, the episodes had become more frequent. Jake would sleepwalk out of the house almost every night, always heading in the same direction, west, toward Nevada. I'd started sleeping in a chair by the front door, but somehow he always found ways to get past me. Through windows, through the basement. Once I'd found him standing on the roof looking toward the horizon. "They're calling louder now," he'd explained when I'd gotten him down. "They say it's almost time." Sarah had wanted to commit him to a psychiatric facility, but I'd convinced her to try one more specialist, a neurologist in Denver who dealt with unusual cases. Dr. Martinez had been intrigued by Jake's symptoms, particularly the light sensitivity and the obsession with specific geographic directions. "Has he been exposed to any electromagnetic anomalies?" she'd asked. "High-frequency radio transmissions? Unusual geological formations?" I told her about our trip to Great Basin, about the ruins and the lights in the forest. She'd listened with a professional expression, making notes, asking clarifying questions. "There have been other cases," she'd said finally. "Rare, but documented. People who visit certain locations and come back, changed. Usually, it's attributed to psychological trauma, but the neurological symptoms suggest something more complex." "What kind of something?" "I don't know, but I think you should stay away from Nevada." The final episode had happened 6 months after our trip. I'd woken at 3 a.m. to find Jake's room empty and our car missing from the garage. Sarah had called the police while I'd checked his computer, looking for clues about where he might have gone. His browser history had been full of satellite images of Great Basin National Park, geological surveys of the area, and academic papers about something called electromagnetic resonance phenomena in volcanic terrain. He'd also been visiting forums where people discussed unusual experiences in remote locations, missing time, equipment malfunctions, encounters with unexplained phenomena. One post had made my blood run cold. It was from a user named Sleepwalker12, who I was certain was Jake. "Going back to the place under the mountain. The ones who sleep are ready to wake up. They need a guide to show them the way. I can hear them calling from their dark places. They've been waiting so long." The post had been made at 2:30 a.m., 30 minutes before I discovered him missing. The state police had found our car abandoned on Wheeler Peak Road, exactly where our RV had broken down 8 months earlier. Jake was nowhere to be seen, but they'd found his footprints leading down into the basin where we'd discovered the ruins. The search had lasted 3 days. Dogs, helicopters, ground teams with thermal imaging equipment. They'd covered every square mile of the area, but there was no sign of Jake. It was as if he'd simply vanished. On the third night, I'd broken away from the search camp and hiked down to the ruins alone. The stone structures were exactly as I remembered them, but something had changed. The central spire was taller now, reaching impossibly high into the star-filled sky, and the symbols carved into its base were glowing with a faint phosphorescent light. I'd called Jake's name, my voice echoing among the stones. For a moment, there had been only silence. Then, from somewhere deep within the ruins, I'd heard a voice that might have been his. "Dad, I'm home now. I'm showing them the way." I'd run toward the sound, scrambling over the black stones, following the voice deeper into the complex. But the ruins seemed to shift around me, passages appearing and disappearing, stairs leading nowhere. Eventually, I'd found myself back at the central spire, alone and exhausted. The rescue teams had found me there at dawn, sitting at the base of the spire with my hands pressed to my ears, trying to block out the whispering that seemed to come from inside the stone itself. That was 2 years ago. Jake is still missing. The case is officially classified as a presumed abduction, though there's no evidence of foul play. Sarah and I divorced 8 months after he disappeared. The strain was too much for our marriage to survive. Emma lives with her mother now and won't speak to me. She blames me for taking the family to that place. I still live in our house in Colorado, but I dream about Nevada every night. I dream about the ruins and the lights in the forest and the impossible building that changes shape when you're not looking directly at it. Sometimes I dream that I can hear Jake calling to me from somewhere far below the surface of the earth. The doctors say the dreams are a symptom of unresolved grief, a psychological manifestation of guilt and loss. They've prescribed medication to help me sleep, but I don't take it. I need to stay alert, because sometimes, late at night, I hear voices whispering in that same language Jake spoke after we returned from Great Basin. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, my pupils are dilated just like his were. 3 weeks ago, I found symbols scratched into the paint on my garage door, the same spiraling patterns we saw at the ruins. I don't remember making them, but they weren't there the day before. Last week, I woke up to find myself standing in my front yard at 3 a.m., facing west toward Nevada. I was holding car keys, though I don't remember getting them. Yesterday, I booked a flight to Las Vegas. I'm not sure why. I just know that I need to go back to Great Basin National Park. I need to find the ruins and the impossible building and the place where my son disappeared. The ones who sleep are calling to me now, just like they called to Jake. I can hear them whispering in the walls of my house, in the static between radio stations, in the hum of fluorescent lights. They're telling me it's time to come home. They're telling me they have something to show me. Tonight, I'm driving to Nevada. I probably won't come back. And if I do, I probably won't be the same person who left. If you're reading this, don't go to Great Basin National Park. Don't take Wheeler Peak Road. And if you see a man with dilated pupils walking west through the desert, don't try to stop him. He's going home to the ones who sleep, and soon they'll be waking up. Found among the personal effects of David Jones, 44, whose abandoned car was discovered on Wheeler Peak Road, Great Basin National Park, Nevada, on November 15th. Despite extensive search efforts, Mr. Jones has not been located. This account was written on hotel stationery and left on the front seat of his vehicle, along with car keys and a wallet containing $340 in cash. The search for Mr. Jones continues. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Marcus Reynolds. I had just turned 28 when we arrived at Hocking Hills, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The corporate retreat was Sarah's idea. She was our team lead at Davidson Marketing, one of those relentlessly positive people who believed team-building exercises could solve any workplace dysfunction. When she suggested we rent an RV and spend a long weekend in Ohio's Hocking Hills, the rest of us, Jake, Rebecca, and myself, figured it beat another trust fall seminar in some sterile conference room. "Think of it as an investment in our collective success," Sarah had said, her perfectly whitened smile never wavering as she showed us the rental RV's photos. 4 days unplugged from technology, connecting with nature and each other. Rebecca, our accountant, had rolled her eyes. As long as the company's paying for it. Jake, the eager new hire fresh out of college, practically bounced in his chair. This is going to be epic. I've never been in an RV before. I should have paid more attention to what the rental company owner told us when we picked up the vehicle. He was a grizzled man in his 60s with calloused hands and worried eyes that seemed to linger on our destination paperwork a beat too long. "Hocking Hills, huh?" he'd muttered, scratching his gray beard. "Beautiful country. Real beautiful. Just stick to the marked trails. Lots of folks get turned around in those woods." "We'll be careful," Sarah had assured him with that same bright smile. "I'm sure you will," he'd replied, but something in his tone suggested he didn't believe us. "That RV's got a CB radio, Channel 9 for emergencies. You get into any trouble out there, you call for help right away. Don't wait." The drive from Columbus took about an hour, our rented Winnebago handling the winding roads through southern Ohio's forested hills better than expected. Sarah had mapped out our route to the campground near Old Man's Cave, one of the most popular spots in the state park. The autumn foliage was at its peak, brilliant reds and golds that should have been breathtaking. Instead, as we descended deeper into the hollows, I felt an inexplicable sense of unease, like we were driving into the throat of some massive, sleeping beast. "Jesus, it's beautiful out here," Jake said, pressing his face to the passenger window. At 26, he still had that college kid enthusiasm that hadn't been beaten out of him by years of corporate drudgery. "Look at those cliffs." He was right. The sandstone formations were spectacular. Towering walls of rock carved by millennia of water and wind into caves, arches, and grottos. But there was something else, too. A quality to the light filtering through the canopy that felt wrong somehow. Too green. Too thick. "The GPS is acting up," I called from behind the wheel, tapping the screen where our blue dot flickered uncertainly among a maze of unnamed roads. "Must be the trees," Rebecca said without looking up from her phone. "Can't get any signal out here either." Sarah consulted the paper map spread across her lap. "We should hit the campground entrance in about 2 miles. There'll be a sign." But 2 miles came and went, then 4, then 6. The road kept winding deeper into the forest, past moss-covered boulders and ravines that dropped away into shadow. No campground, no signs, just more trees closing in around us like a living tunnel. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Jake asked, his enthusiasm finally showing cracks. "The map says..." Sarah started, then stopped. She was staring down at the paper with a frown. "That's weird." "What's weird?" "This road we're on. It's not on the map anymore." I pulled over at a small gravel turnout and we all gathered around Sarah's map. She was right. According to the official Park Service publication, the road we'd been following for the last 10 minutes simply didn't exist. "Maybe it's a new road," Jake suggested. "Maps get outdated." Rebecca snatched her phone from the dashboard and held it up, searching for signal. Nothing, not even one bar. The CB radio crackled to life suddenly, making us all jump. Through the static came a voice, distant, distorted. "Anyone out there? Day 3. Supplies running low. If anyone can hear this..." I grabbed the handset. "Hello? This is Marcus. Can you hear me?" Static. Then nothing. "Probably just picking up some long-distance transmission," Rebecca said, but she didn't sound convinced. We decided to continue down the unmarked road for another few miles. If we didn't find the campground, we'd turn around and backtrack. But the forest seemed to swallow our headlights as the afternoon sun disappeared behind the canopy, and I began to realize we hadn't seen another vehicle, or any signs of human presence, for over an hour. "There," Sarah said suddenly, pointing ahead. "I see something." Through the trees, we glimpsed what looked like a clearing. As we drew closer, we found a small campground. A handful of fire rings, some weathered picnic tables, and a single pit toilet that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. There was no camp host, no registration booth, no signs of any kind. "This doesn't look like the place in the brochure," Jake said. It didn't, but it was getting dark, and we were all tired from the drive. We decided to make camp here and sort out our location in the morning. The RV's generator hummed to life as we set up for the night, its yellow lights pushing back the encroaching darkness. Sarah insisted we build a campfire for the full outdoor experience, but the kindling refused to catch no matter how much lighter fluid Jake doused it with. "Weird," he muttered, crouching beside the ring of stones. "This stuff should go up like a torch." When the fire finally did light, nearly an hour later, the flames burned with an odd blue tinge that cast sickly shadows across our faces. "Must be something in the wood," Rebecca said, but she moved her camp chair farther back. We roasted hot dogs over the strange fire and told work stories, trying to maintain the illusion that this was just a normal camping trip. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the place. The silence was too complete. No insects, no nightbirds, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just the hiss and pop of our blue-tinged fire and the distant sound of water running somewhere in the darkness. Around midnight, Rebecca announced she was turning in. "I've got to pee first," she said, grabbing her flashlight and heading toward the pit toilet. She came back white-faced and shaken. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. There's something wrong with that toilet." "Like what kind of wrong?" Rebecca shuddered. "Just look for yourself. I'm holding it until morning." None of us investigated. Something in her voice suggested we really didn't want to know. We retreated to the RV, leaving the fire to burn itself out. The four of us arranged ourselves in the small space. Sarah and I took the bed in the back. Rebecca claimed the dinette that converted to a single bunk, and Jake got the sofa. But sleep was elusive. The RV creaked and settled in ways that seemed too rhythmic, too deliberate. Like breathing. I was finally drifting off when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound coming from somewhere outside. Fingernails on fiberglass, maybe, or claws on metal. I lay still, listening, but the sound stopped. Then Jake's voice, very quiet in the darkness. "Did you guys hear that?" "Hear what?" Sarah whispered. "Footsteps. Someone walking around the RV." We all held our breath, straining to listen. But there was only silence. "Probably just an animal," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "Probably." None of us slept well that first night. I woke to the smell of something rotten, not just unpleasant, actively nauseating like meat left too long in the sun. Sarah was already awake beside me, her hand pressed over her nose and mouth. "God, what is that smell?" We stumbled out of the bunk area to find Jake and Rebecca standing in the kitchenette, staring into the open refrigerator. "All the food's gone bad," Rebecca said. "Everything, even the stuff that was frozen solid." She was right. The hot dogs, lunch meat, cheese, even the sealed packages of crackers, everything had turned black with mold or corruption. The smell was overwhelming. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "We just bought this stuff yesterday." "Well, tell that to the food," Jake said, holding up a package of hot dogs that looked like they'd been rotting for weeks. We dumped everything in garbage bags and sealed them outside, but the smell lingered in the RV like a presence. Sarah suggested we hike into the park to find a ranger station or visitor center where we could get our bearings, and maybe buy some replacement supplies. "I saw a trail marker yesterday when we were setting up camp," she said. "There has to be an actual trail system around here somewhere." We locked up the RV and set off into the woods, following what looked like a narrow hiking path that wound between the towering trees. The morning light filtering through the canopy had that same sickly green quality I'd noticed the day before, and our footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. After about a mile, we came to a junction where our trail met another, wider path. There was a wooden signpost, but the trail markers had been deliberately torn off, leaving only rusty nails and splinters. "Which way?" Jake asked. Sarah consulted her compass. "The main trail system should be east. Let's try that way." But after another mile of hiking, we found ourselves back at the same intersection, approaching from the direction we'd originally come. "That's not possible," Rebecca said, checking her watch. "We've been walking for 45 minutes, in a straight line." "Must have gotten turned around somehow," I said, but the explanation felt hollow. We tried again, this time marking our route by breaking branches and stacking stones. Same result. We ended up back at the intersection. our markers clearly visible along the path we'd supposedly never taken. "We're walking in circles," Jake said, and for the first time since we'd arrived, his voice carried real fear. That's when Sarah noticed the tree. It stood directly in the center of the intersection. A massive oak that had to be centuries old, its trunk scarred by some ancient lightning strike. But it wasn't the tree itself that made us all stop and stare. It was what was carved into the bark. Names, dozens of them, gouged into the wood with what looked like knife blades or broken glass. Some were fresh, the letters still sharp and clear. Others were old, stretched and distorted by years of growth. "Help us," read one near the base of the trunk. "Don't trust them," read another. And there, about 5 feet up, carved in letters that looked no more than a few weeks old: Sarah Chen, Marcus Reynolds, Rebecca Torres, Jake Morrison. Our names, all 4 of them. "What the fuck?" Rebecca whispered. Jake reached out to touch the carving, then jerked his hand back like the bark had burned him. "How is that possible? Who could have known we were coming here?" "Someone's playing games with us," Sarah said, but her voice was shaking. "This has to be some kind of joke." I pulled out my phone, tried again to find a signal. Nothing. Not even a whisper of cellular coverage. "We need to get back to the RV," I said. "Pack up and get out of here." But when we tried to retrace our steps to the campground, we found ourselves lost again. Every trail seemed to lead back to that same intersection, that same tree with our names carved into its ancient bark. We were on our 4th attempt to find our way back when Jake disappeared. One moment he was walking behind Rebecca, complaining about his sore feet and wishing he'd worn better hiking boots. The next moment, Rebecca turned around and he was gone. "Jake," she called. "Jake, where are you?" No answer. We backtracked along the trail, calling his name, but it was as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. "He couldn't have just wandered off," Sarah said. "We would have heard him." "Maybe he fell," I suggested, though the terrain was flat and clear on both sides of the trail. We searched for an hour, shouting ourselves hoarse before admitting we needed help. I tried the CB radio in my backpack, but got only static. "We have to find our way back to the RV," Sarah decided. "Get the authorities involved." But we couldn't find our way back. Every path led to the intersection, to the tree, to our carved names staring back at us like an accusation. It was Rebecca who finally spotted the smoke rising above the treetops. "There," she said, pointing. "That has to be our camp." We followed the smoke through the forest, crashing through underbrush and scrambling over fallen logs. The campground appeared ahead of us like a mirage, our RV sitting exactly where we'd left it, the remains of our blue fire still smoldering in the stone ring. But something was wrong. The RV's door was standing open, and Jake was sitting at the picnic table staring into the woods. "Jake!" Sarah called, running toward him. "Where were you? We've been looking everywhere." He turned to look at us and smiled. It was Jake's smile. The same eager, slightly goofy grin we'd seen 100 times in the office. But something was off about it. Too wide, too fixed, like someone wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. "I got lost," he said simply, "but I found my way back." "We were worried sick," Rebecca said, but she kept her distance. I noticed she was studying Jake's face with the same expression she used when reviewing financial reports for discrepancies. "Sorry," Jake said, still smiling that wrong smile. "I'm fine now." That evening, we tried to discuss what had happened. Jake claimed he'd simply taken a wrong turn and gotten disoriented, then followed the smoke back to camp. But his story didn't add up. He couldn't explain how he'd gotten so far away so quickly or why he hadn't heard us calling his name. More disturbing were the little things. Jake had always been fidgety, constantly tapping his feet or drumming his fingers. Now he sat perfectly still. He'd been a vegetarian since college, but when Sarah offered him a granola bar, he asked if we had any meat instead. And his laugh, when Rebecca told one of her dry accounting jokes, Jake laughed too loud and too long, like he was imitating a sound he'd heard but didn't quite understand. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked him as we sat around the fire. The flames were burning blue again, casting weird shadows across his face. "I feel great," he said, and that smile never wavered. better than ever. But Rebecca wasn't buying it. She'd been watching Jake all evening with increasing suspicion. "What's the last thing you remember from the office?" she asked suddenly. Jake's smile flickered for just a moment. "What do you mean? Before we left for this trip, what was the last project you were working on?" The Henderson account," Jake said slowly. "We finished the Henderson account 2 months ago," Rebecca said quietly. Jake's smile stretched wider. "Did we? Time flies." That night, none of us wanted to sleep in the RV with Jake. Sarah suggested we set up the pop-up tent we'd brought as backup, but when we went to get it from the storage compartment, we found it had been shredded to ribbons. "Must have been an animal," Jake said, but his tone was flat, emotionless. "What kind of animal could do that?" I asked, holding up strips of torn nylon. Jake shrugged. "Wild animals can be very destructive. We ended up sleeping in the RV anyway. What choice did we have?" But Rebecca whispered to me while Jake was in the bathroom that she'd found a hatchet in the toolbox and was keeping it next to her bunk. "Something's wrong with him," she said. "That's not Jake." "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know. But look at his eyes when you get a chance." "Really look." I did when Jake came back from the bathroom. His eyes were still blue, still the same shape, still in the same face, but they were empty. Like looking into colored glass instead of living tissue. I was lying awake around 3 a.m. when I heard the scratching again. This time it was definitely coming from outside the RV, a rhythmic scraping like claws or fingernails on fiberglass. I slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Sarah, and peered through the small window above the dinette. Jake was standing outside. But Jake was also asleep in his bunk 6 feet away from me, his chest rising and falling with deep, regular breaths. The Jake outside was just standing there in the moonlight, perfectly still, facing away from the RV, waiting. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. But when I looked again, the figure was still there. Same clothes, same posture, same everything. Except this Jake was wrong somehow. Too tall, maybe, or standing at an angle that human joints couldn't quite achieve. I reached over and shook the Jake on the sofa. His eyes snapped open immediately, and he turned to look at me with that horrible fixed smile. "Can't sleep?" he asked. When I looked back out the window, the other Jake was gone. Morning brought new horrors. I woke to find our sleeping bags zipped open from the inside, though none of us remembered unzipping them. Sarah's backpack had vanished completely, along with all our water purification tablets and emergency flares. "I put it right there," she insisted, pointing to the empty floor by the door. "I remember putting it right there before we went to bed." "Maybe you moved it and forgot," Jake suggested with that same artificial smile. "I didn't move it. Memory can be unreliable in stressful situations. They warned us. Locals always do." But we laughed. "My name's Dylan Foster. I just turned 28 when we arrived at Saguaro National Park, and it was the worst mistake of our lives." The old man at the gas station in Tucson had leaned against our RV's window, his weathered face creased with concern. "You folks planning to camp out there long?" he'd asked, nodding toward the desert stretching endlessly beyond the pumps. "Just a long weekend," Arya had replied cheerfully from the passenger seat, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sun. "We're celebrating our anniversary." The man's expression had darkened. 3 years running, people go missing out there this time of year. Rangers find their vehicles days later, sometimes weeks. Empty. No signs of struggle. He'd tapped the side of our RV with a gnarled finger. "Desert's got its own rules, son. Don't stay after dark if you can help it." Arya and I had exchanged amused glances. We were city kids from Phoenix, sure, but we weren't helpless. I'd bought the RV specifically for adventures like this, a chance to disconnect from our demanding jobs and reconnect with each other. What could go wrong in a national park? Everything. The first day had been perfect. We'd driven the loop road through the Sonoran Desert, marveling at the towering saguaro cacti that gave the park its name. Some of them were over 150 years old, standing like ancient sentinels in the rust-colored landscape. Arya had taken dozens of photos, her excitement infectious as she pointed out roadrunners and javelinas. We'd found a dispersed camping spot about 3 miles off the main road, nestled between two low hills that provided some shelter from the wind. The silence out there was profound. No traffic, no sirens, just the whisper of desert breeze through the cacti and the distant call of a coyote. "This is exactly what we needed," Arya had said that first evening, curled against me on the RV's small couch as we watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. No emails, no deadlines, just us. I'd kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with desert air. "Happy anniversary, babe." We'd made love that night to the sound of wind against the RV's walls, and I'd fallen asleep thinking this might be the trip where I finally proposed. The ring was hidden in my shaving kit, waiting for the perfect moment. I woke on the second day to find Arya already dressed and sitting at the dinette, staring out the window with an odd expression. "Morning, beautiful," I mumbled, padding to the kitchenette to start coffee. "Sleep okay?" "Did you hear that last night?" she asked without turning around. "Hear what?" "Voices, outside, around 3 in the morning." I paused in measuring coffee grounds. "Voices, like other campers?" "No." She finally looked at me and I was surprised to see dark circles under her eyes. Like whispering, right outside our bedroom window. The RV's bedroom was at the back, facing away from the road. If someone had been whispering there, they would have had to walk specifically to that spot. The thought made me uncomfortable, but I kept my voice light. "Probably just the wind, hun. Desert plays tricks on you." She shook her head. "I know what wind sounds like, Dylan." This was different. It sounded like they were trying to be quiet, like they didn't want to wake us up, but they were talking about us. A chill ran down my spine despite the warming morning air. What were they saying? I couldn't make out the words. It wasn't English, I don't think. But the tone. She shuddered. It sounded excited, like they'd found something they'd been looking for. I brought her coffee and sat beside her, taking her hand. It was cold, despite the warmth building outside. "You were probably just dreaming, Arya. First night camping can be weird. All those new sounds." She squeezed my fingers. "Maybe you're right. I had the strangest feeling we were being watched." To distract her, I suggested we hike to a nearby petroglyphs site I'd read about. The mile-long trail wound through a wash between two ridges, leading to a series of ancient rock drawings created by the Hohokam people centuries ago. The hike started pleasantly enough. The morning air was crisp, and the desert was alive with small sounds. The skitter of lizards over rocks, the distant trill of a cactus wren. Arya's mood improved as we walked, and she began taking photos again. "Look at this one," she called, pointing to a saguaro that had grown in an unusual spiral pattern. "It's like it's dancing." I was about to respond when my phone chimed. Strange. We were supposed to be out of cell range. I pulled it out to find a text from an unknown number. She heard us. "What's wrong?" Arya asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the message. Her face went pale. "Dylan, we don't have service out here. How did that come through?" I checked my signal bars. Nothing. The message should have been impossible to receive. Yet there it was, time-stamped just seconds ago. "Probably came through earlier and just showed up now," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. System glitch. But as we continued toward the petroglyphs, more messages began appearing on my phone, all from the same unknown number. "She knows we're here. Pretty hair, pretty eyes. We've been waiting." Each message came through despite showing no cell service. Arya grew increasingly agitated as I showed them to her. "We should go back," she said, stopping in the middle of the trail. "Something's not right here." I wanted to argue, to be the rational one, but the messages were unsettling me too. There was something wrong about their tone, something that made my skin crawl. "Okay," I agreed. "Let's head back." That's when we discovered the trail had changed. The path we'd followed into the wash was gone. In its place were 3 different trails, each heading in a different direction. None of them looked familiar. "This doesn't make sense," Arya said, turning in a slow circle. "We came straight through here. There was only one path." I pulled out my phone to check our location, but the GPS showed only a blank screen where the map should have been. According to the device, we didn't exist. The heat's probably affecting the electronics, I said, though sweat was already beading on my forehead and it wasn't from the temperature. We'll just retrace our steps. But which steps? The 3 trails all looked worn and well used, as if they'd been there for years. Panic began to flutter in my chest as I realized I couldn't remember which direction we'd come from. Dylan. Aria's voice was barely a whisper. Look. She was pointing to a cluster of rocks about 50 yards away. Carved into the stone were fresh petroglyphs. Not the ancient Hohokam designs we'd come to see, but crude, recent scratches that looked like they'd been made with a knife or sharp stone. The images showed stick figures surrounding what looked like an RV. The figures had oversized mouths, and lines radiated from them toward the vehicle, as if they were speaking or singing. At the bottom of the rock, someone had scratched a date. Today's date. We ran. I don't remember which trail we chose, only that we moved as fast as the rocky terrain would allow. Aria's hand gripped tightly in mine. The petroglyphs had been too much, too specific. Someone was playing games with us, but the alternative, that we'd somehow stumbled into something genuinely supernatural, was worse. We emerged from the wash 20 minutes later, gasping and sweat-soaked, to find our RV exactly where we'd left it. Relief flooded through me as I fumbled for the keys. "Thank God," Aria breathed. "Let's get out of here. We can camp somewhere else." But as I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine didn't even turn over. All the dashboard lights that should have illuminated remained dark. "Battery's dead," I said, though it made no sense. The RV was only 2 years old, and I'd had the electrical system checked before we left Phoenix. "How is that possible?" Aria asked. I popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. The battery cables had been disconnected. Not corroded or broken, but deliberately removed. The metal connectors lay neatly beside the battery, as if someone had carefully taken them off. "Someone doesn't want us to leave," I said, my voice coming out hoarser than I'd intended. Aria peered over my shoulder at the engine. "Why would someone do this? What do they want?" I reconnected the cables with shaking hands, hyper-aware of the vast emptiness surrounding us. The nearest ranger station was 15 miles away, and we hadn't seen another person since leaving the main road yesterday. The engine turned over on the first try, and I nearly sobbed with relief. Whatever game someone was playing, we were done with it. But as I put the RV in drive, Aria grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said. "Do you hear that?" I cut the engine and listened. At first, there was only the normal desert silence. Then I heard it. A low, humming sound, like someone singing with their mouth closed. It seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the hills. "Where's it coming from?" I whispered. The humming grew louder, more complex, as if multiple voices had joined the first. The sound was hypnotic, almost beautiful, but there was something deeply wrong about it. The melody, if it could be called that, seemed to twist and fold in on itself in ways that hurt to follow. "We need to leave. Now," Aria said. I started the engine again, but as I reached for the gear shift, movement caught my eye in the side mirror. A figure stood on the ridge behind us, tall, impossibly thin, and perfectly motionless. Even at this distance, I could see it was facing our direction. "Aria," I said carefully, "don't turn around, but there's someone watching us." She immediately twisted in her seat to look out the rear window. "I don't see anyone." I checked the mirror again. The ridge was empty. "They're gone," I said, but my hands were shaking as I put the RV in drive. We made it less than a mile before the engine died. This time, it wasn't the battery. The RV simply lost power and coasted to a stop, all the electrical systems going dark. I tried the ignition repeatedly, but got nothing. "This is impossible," I muttered, popping the hood again. Everything was fine 5 minutes ago. But under the hood, chaos greeted me. Wires had been pulled loose, the air filter housing had been removed, and someone had poured sand into the oil reservoir. The sabotage was thorough and would have taken at least an hour to accomplish. "Dylan," Aria called from inside the RV, her voice tight with fear. "You need to see this." I found her standing in our bedroom, staring at the window where she'd heard the whispers the night before. Pressed against the glass from the outside was a handprint, but not a human handprint. The fingers were too long, and there seemed to be too many of them. "That wasn't there this morning," she whispered. I examined the print more closely. The glass was cool to the touch despite the warming day, and condensation had formed around the edges of the mark as if it had been made by something very cold. "We need to call for help," I said, pulling out my phone. But when I tried to dial 911, the call wouldn't go through. Not because of lack of signal, the phone showed full bars now, but because every call was answered by the same voice. A child's voice, high and sweet. "Hi, Dylan. Hi, Aria. We've been waiting for you." I hung up and tried again. Same voice, same message. "Who is this?" I demanded on the third attempt. "We live here," the child said. "In the quiet spaces, in the empty places. We've been so lonely." "What do you want?" "To play, to sing, to make you stay." The line went dead. Aria had been listening, her face growing paler with each exchange. "This isn't real," she said. "This can't be real." But it was real. And it was just the beginning. Over the next several hours, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, our situation deteriorated rapidly. The water pump stopped working, though the tank was full. The refrigerator died, causing our food to spoil with unnatural speed. The air conditioning failed, leaving us to swelter in the metal box of the RV. Worse were the sounds. The humming continued sporadically, sometimes near, sometimes distant. Occasionally we heard footsteps circling the RV, but whenever I looked outside, I saw nothing. Voices called to us from the desert. Sometimes the child's voice from the phone, sometimes what sounded like other campers in distress. "Help us," they would cry. "We're lost. Please help us." But Arya and I had learned not to trust anything we heard. As afternoon faded to evening, the activity intensified. Shadows began moving independently of their sources, sliding across the RV's walls in patterns that made no sense. Objects disappeared and reappeared in different locations. The bathroom mirror showed reflections that didn't match our movements. And the messages on my phone continued. "Soon. When the sun goes down. She'll understand then." "Understand what?" Arya asked when I showed her the latest message. I didn't have an answer, but I was beginning to suspect we wouldn't like finding out. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood, Arya announced she was going outside. "I can't stay in here anymore," she said, heading for the door. "I feel like I'm suffocating." "Arya, no," I said, grabbing her arm. "We don't know what's out there." "I don't care anymore," she snapped, pulling away. "This is all in our heads, Dylan. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, stress. We're making ourselves crazy." She yanked open the door and stepped outside before I could stop her. I followed, afraid to let her out of my sight. The desert air was cooler now, but it felt thick, almost viscous. The silence was complete. No insects, no bird calls, nothing. Even the wind had died. "See?" Arya said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Nothing out here but rocks and cacti." That's when the singing started. It rose from the earth itself, a wordless melody that seemed to come from every direction at once. The sound was beautiful and terrible, ancient beyond measure, and it called to something deep in my brain that remembered when humans were prey animals hiding from things in the dark. Arya's expression changed as the song washed over us. The fear left her face, replaced by something like wonder. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "It's beautiful." "We need to get back inside," I said, but she was already walking away from the RV, toward the nearest hill. "Arya," I called, but she didn't respond. She moved like a sleepwalker drawn by the hypnotic melody. I ran after her, catching her arm just as she reached the base of the hill. "Arya, stop!" She turned to face me, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were completely black, reflecting no light at all. "They want to show me something," she said in a voice that wasn't quite her own. "Something wonderful." "Fight it," I said, shaking her shoulders. "This isn't real. Come back to me." For a moment her eyes cleared and I saw terror in them. "Dylan," she gasped. "I can't. They're in my head. They're showing me things. Beautiful things." Then the blackness returned, and she smiled with too many teeth. "We're going to sing together," she said. "Forever and ever." She broke free from my grip with impossible strength and ran up the hillside. I followed, stumbling over rocks and dodging cacti, but she moved with inhuman grace, never missing a step. At the top of the hill, she stopped. Below us, in a natural depression I hadn't noticed before, was a camp. Not a modern campsite, but something older. A circle of strange structures that might have been tents if tents were made of shadow and starlight. Figures moved between them, tall and thin and wrong, and in the center of the camp, a fire burned with blue-white flames that cast no shadows. "Welcome," said a voice from the camp below. The child's voice from the phone, but multiplied, as if dozens of children spoke in unison. "We've been waiting so long for visitors." Arya began walking down the hill toward the camp. I grabbed for her again, but my hand passed through her as if she were made of mist. "She belongs to us now," the voices said, "but don't worry, soon you will too." I ran back toward the RV, terror giving me speed. Behind me, I could hear Arya singing along with the other voices, her melody weaving through theirs in harmonies that should have been impossible. I slammed the RV door and locked it, though I suspected locks wouldn't help against whatever was out there. My phone was buzzing with new messages. "She's beautiful when she sings. Don't you want to join her? She's asking for you." I turned off the phone and threw it into a cabinet, but I could still hear it buzzing inside. Hours passed. The singing continued, sometimes loud, sometimes soft, but never stopping entirely. I huddled in the RV's bedroom, the curtains drawn, trying not to listen to Arya's voice among the others. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. "Dylan," Arya's voice called. "I'm back. I'm okay. Please let me in." I didn't answer. I'd seen her eyes go black. I'd watched her walk into that impossible camp. "Dylan, please," she said, and her voice sounded normal now, frightened and desperate. "I got away. They're still out there, but I got away. Please open the door." Every instinct screamed at me to let her in, but I remembered the too wide smile the way my hand had passed through her. "Prove it's you," I called out. "What do you mean? It's me. It's Arya. I'm hurt, Dylan. Please. Tell me something only Arya would know." Silence for a long moment. Then, We met at the coffee shop on 5th Street. You spilled espresso on my laptop and I was so mad until you smiled. You bought me a new laptop the next day, even though we'd only just met. It was true, every word. Relief flooded through me and I reached for the door handle. Then I stopped. Arya had never told that story that way. She'd always said I spilled coffee on her dress, not her laptop. And I'd bought her flowers the next day, not a laptop. "Nice try," I said. The knocking stopped. When it resumed a few minutes later, the sound was different. Rhythmic, almost musical. As if multiple hands were drumming against the door in perfect unison. I spent the rest of the night barricaded in the bedroom, listening to the things outside trying to get in. They used every voice I'd ever loved. My mother, my brother, my college roommate. But they always got some detail wrong. Some small thing that only the real person would know. Dawn came eventually, and with it, silence. I waited until the sun was fully up before venturing out of the bedroom. The RV was exactly as I'd left it. But outside the windows, the landscape had changed. The hills were gone, replaced by flat, featureless desert that stretched to the horizon in every direction. I tried the engine. It started immediately. I drove for what felt like hours, but the landscape never changed. The sun remained fixed at its morning position, casting no shadows. My GPS showed only static, and the odometer had stopped working. Eventually, I stopped the RV and got out to check our location. That's when I saw them. Tire tracks in the sand, leading in a perfect circle around a spot about 100 yards in diameter. My tire tracks. I'd been driving in circles, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the fresh footprints leading from the tire tracks to the RV. Human footprints, bare feet with too many toes. I'm writing this on my laptop, hoping someone will find it. The battery shouldn't last much longer, and I don't think the solar panels are working properly anymore. The sun hasn't moved in hours. They're singing outside again. Aria's voice is clearer now, closer. She's asking me to come out, to join her. Sometimes she sounds like herself, sometimes like the thing I saw on the hill. I think I'm going to die here. I think that's what this place does. It takes people, changes them, adds them to its collection. The old man at the gas station knew. 3 years running, he'd said. People go missing. If you're reading this, don't come looking for us. Don't come to Saguaro National Park in late October. And if you hear singing in the desert, if you see footprints that don't belong to any human, run. The knocking has started again. Gentle this time, patient. Aria's voice calls to me, sweet and loving and wrong. She's telling me about the beautiful things she's seen, the songs she's learned, the new friends she's made. She says they're lonely, these things in the desert. They've been waiting so long for someone to stay. She says if I come out, we can be together forever. She says the singing never stops, and the sun never sets, and nobody ever has to be alone. It's tempting. God help me, it's tempting. But I know it's not really Aria out there. The real Aria is gone, taken by something that wears her voice like a mask. And I won't let it take me too. I'm going to try to drive again. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe I can find the way out. But if not, if you find this RV empty in the desert with only this account to explain what happened, then you'll know the truth. Some places are hungry. Some places call to you in the voices of people you love, promising forever. Don't listen. Don't go to them. And whatever you do, don't let them sing you to sleep. The knocking has stopped. I can hear footsteps circling the RV now. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They're all singing Aria's song. I'm going to try the engine one more time. If this is my last entry, tell my family I love them. Tell them I tried to come home. Tell them the desert kept us. Found in an abandoned RV 3 miles off Kinney Road in Saguaro National Park West, November 2025. No trace of the occupants was ever discovered. The vehicle's electrical system showed signs of extensive tampering, though park rangers could not determine how the sabotage was accomplished or by whom. This document was recovered from a laptop found on the dinette table. The battery was completely drained, though the computer should have had several hours of life remaining. Rangers reported hearing faint singing while processing the scene, but attributed it to wind through the cacti. The case remains open.